There's a video now on social media that's gone viral that after images of MS Dhoni were flashed across every possible media of him in his private garage, a video that was filmed by his wife Sakshi Dhoni, and with him are two former players in Venkatesh Prasad and Sunil Joshi, both of whom are in awe of MS Dhoni's bike collection. Now, as soon as that video went viral, there were various reports as to, the number of bikes MS Dhoni has, the vintage of those bikes, how long has he had those bikes. I read a lot of those reports, and I'm afraid to say that most of them have got their details and figures wrong. In this particular episode of SporTales, I am Nikhil Naz, and I'm going to tell you the exact number of bikes MS Dhoni has, what are the different varieties, his love for bikes, and some various interesting anecdotes when it comes to his love for motorbiking. Now, before I begin, I want to tell you that this is a Ducati Multistrada, a 1200cc bikes, one of my favorite adventure tourers amongst a few others that I love from Ducati, one being a Ducati Diavel, the other being a Ducati Hyperstrada. I own a Ninja 1000 myself, and I absolutely love that bike. But this story is not about this particular bike. This story is about the number of bikes that MS Dhoni has and what are the vintage of those bikes. Now, interestingly, if you are from the same generation as me and MS Dhoni, there are few bikes that you will remember, and that is a Yamaha RD350. It was sold as the Rajdoot Yamaha 350 and the RX100. And I think it's a common love for these bikes that has given me the opportunity and the insights to know the exact bike collection of MS Dhoni and a few other interesting details about his love for motorbiking. Now, I've covered him for a period of, close to 2 decades since he made his debut. And more often than not, whenever I met him, we've spoken about cricket. But very recently, I had the opportunity to speak to him about motorbiking because that's a shared passion. And that's when certain details came about, which I'm going to share with you. So first up, the number of bikes that MS Dhoni has. Well, the count as of now, and I'm talking about August of 2023, stands at 84. Right, of course, that figure will keep changing because he keeps acquiring new bikes. There is a video that went viral a few years ago on social media where MS Dhoni himself is saying he has 50 odd bikes.
I think I have 50 plus bikes.
Okay.
But that was a few years ago. At the moment, I'm talking August 2023, his bike collection is 84 bikes that he has in his garage. Interestingly, out of the 84 bikes that he has, 34 of those bikes are Yamaha RD350. Now, why would somebody have 34 of those bikes? That's because, as I said, if you grew up in the 80s and 90s, like myself and MS Dhoni, you would realize what a cult following that bike has. A few years ago, I had interviewed another bike enthusiast in John Abraham.
Long time ago, with the helmet on in the night, a group of college kids stopped in a car next to me, looked at me, and said, "Aapko Johnny Abraham se hota hai."
Which is one of his favorite bikes or his favorite bikes, and even he had picked an RD350. In fact, that was the first ever bike that John Abraham had bought. Now, John Abraham still had the means to buy that bike because when it was launched in 1982 in India, it was priced at a pricely sum of 30,000 rupees, very expensive. MS Dhoni, unfortunately, did not own that bike in his growing up days. If you see the film MS Dhoni, you will often see him riding a bike, but he more often than not rides a regular 100cc bikes. Sometimes he's also seen riding a RX100, which belongs to a gentleman who owns the sporting store, who's one of his close friends. But he himself rides a regular 100cc bike that could be a TVS or a Suzuki or various other bikes that were available then. Not the RD350. That was a rare bike. It was launched in India in 1983. Just to give you a bit of a background about that bike and why he loves that, it was launched in 83, and in 1989 it was discontinued. Why was it discontinued? That's because it was considered too fast and too dangerous for Indian roads. Now, the RD in RD350 actually means race derived. RD stands for race derived, Yamaha 350. But in India, people started calling it RD meant Rapid Death. So Rapid Death 350. They said that because one, it had a lot of power. It had close to, nearing almost 30 bhp if you did a bit of work on it. A two-stroke bike at 30 bhp was very dangerous. And the other problem with that bike was that it did not have any disc brakes. It had very ordinary brakes on a bike as powerful as that, which meant that the front braking was almost negligible, which is why if you went on it on very high speed, it would not stop in dangerous situations, resulting in a few deaths. That's why it was called Rapid Death. Now, why did it not have disc brakes? That bike was launched globally. Everywhere else it had disc brakes, but in India it was launched in partnership with Rajdoot, and Rajdoot wanted to cut costs, knowing anyway that 30,000 is going to be way out of budget for a lot of people, and to reduce cost they removed the disc brakes, and I think that was the undoing of that bike, and that is why it didn't prove to be very successful. It was discontinued very soon. The other thing that really didn't work in that bike's favor, it used to give a average about 12 to 15 kilometers a liter, which a lot of youngsters who love that bike could not have afforded that kind of mileage on a bike. So these two things went against that motorbike. But coming to MS Dhoni, why does he love that? Why does he have 34 of those RD350s? That's because, as I said, it was an aspirational bike. If you grew up in the 80s and 90s, it was an aspirational bike. Everyone wanted it, but people could not afford it. Now that he's in a position to do that, of course, he's got a lot of it. As I said, you must have seen a few other videos of people, taking those spy shots outside his Ranchi house, showing him, riding the bike inside his compound. Notice it carefully. That's the RD350 he's riding. The problem of having that bike is it's very tough to maintain it right now because the spare parts are not easily available. It's been discontinued for very long. But when I was talking to MS Dhoni, he said that, earlier he would source those parts. He would go to a person in Bangalore who would fix those RD350s for him and keep them, in working conditions. But now he's reached a stage, because that's how big a motor nut he is. He actually fixes those bikes himself. He just outsources those parts. He orders it online, brings it, and works on those bikes and keeps them running by himself. So he's an expert mechanic even when it comes to old bikes. So he's got an RX100. He's got these RD350s. Of course, he's got some big fancy bikes as well. He doesn't have a multi-strada, but he's got, one bike that most fans in India would know is the Suzuki Hayabusa. Many people call it the Dhoom bike. It became popular from that film Dhoom. MS Dhoni owns one of that. But interestingly, do you know, and this is something that no one would tell you, he's had that Suzuki Hayabusa, which at one point used to be the fastest production bike in India. No more. In fact, the fastest production bike in the world a few years ago. It reached a top speed of 186. Now there are other bikes that have overtaken that. He's had that bike for a very long time, but he's not even ridden it once. He's never taken his Suzuki Hayabusa for a ride. It is there as a showpiece in his garage, as you see, but he's never taken it for a ride. Hayabusa he owns, but has not ridden. Talking about the fastest production bike, Hayabusa isn't that. The fastest production bike right now is the Kawasaki H2. He owns that as well. And I'll tell you a very interesting story about MS Dhoni's Kawasaki H2. And this is a story which even MS Dhoni doesn't know. I'll tell you because I had a friend, when the H2 about a few years ago was launched in India, the Kawasaki guys had a launch at the Budh International Circuit, not too far from where I am right now in Greater Noida. And they called the media over and the bike was displayed. The media could take pictures, videos of the bike. But as is the case, media asked that, can we ride, because it was at the Budh circuit, can we take it for a ride? And they usually, bike manufacturers, whenever they unveil a bike, they also allow media journalists, or automobile journalists to take a ride of it, test it. They said, right now we can't allow you. We're getting another bike, but this bike we can't allow you to ride. And then obviously the journalist asked, why can't we ride that? They said, because this is the first H2 that has come to India. But even before it came to India, we already got a booking and it's already been booked. Because it's been bought by someone, we can't allow you to ride it. And so they said, who's the one who's bought it? And that gentleman was MS Dhoni. So MS Dhoni had booked his H2, Kawasaki H2, even before it came to India. So that was the bike that was displayed to the media, but they could not ride it because it actually belonged to MS Dhoni. Later that bike, of course, went to him. It is still in his garage. The other thing I love about MS Dhoni, the bike enthusiast, what happens is in biking culture, and I ride with a group and I've ridden, bikes with various other people. What happens is as soon as you start maturing as a biker or you start growing in your professional career, you have more money, dispensable income. So your want for a bigger bike keeps increasing. So you may start with a small bike, the next one you want a bigger and a more fancier with a larger engine. That's what people aspire to do. MS Dhoni, why I say he's a true biker, is because he, as I mentioned, Hayabusa has never ridden. He has many other fancy bikes with him, but his love for each bike is the same. It's not that a 100cc bike he does not like. In fact, there were a few times when I was in Ranchi, I saw him come from his farmhouse to the playing facility, and he was riding an Apache 310 single cylinder bike, a TVS Apache 310cc bike from his farmhouse to the practice. He, as I said, has 84 bikes, all sizes, shape, fancy ones, but it's just any bike. And he said, I spoke to him, he said, you know, even the Apache 310 is such a fun bike to ride, and he enjoys riding it. In fact, his dream bike, and I spoke to him, you know, about, I was talking to him about my Kawasaki Ninja, the 1000cc bike. It's a, you know, inline 4, 1000cc. He says, no, it's a good bike, I've ridden it, but his dream bike, one bike that he really wants to buy, is a 250cc bike, not a 1000cc, not a 1200cc, not a 1800cc bikes that are available. He said, there's a 250cc bike that Kawasaki makes, and I want to buy it. It's not available in India. And do you know why he wants to buy it? Because he says it's a 250. That means it's a small capacity motorcycle in terms of its engine, but is a inline 4. So has 4-cylinder in 250, which actually means, and if you understand motorcycling, you'd know that a 1000cc bike, if I have 4-cylinder, for me to take it, the RPM to redlining, as in 8,000, 9,000, 10,000 RPM, I need to be at a very high speed. High speed on Indian roads is not safe. So if you really want to redline the RPM, really take the engine to the edge, you need a lesser capacity motorcycle. But imagine 4-cylinder. So I said 4-cylinder, but in 250cc, I could redline that bike on every gear. And can you imagine how much fun that will be? And I could relate to that as a biker. And if you're a biker watching this video, you'd be able to relate to that too. So, you know, that is what MS Dhoni is. His love for biking is not, you know, just because he has a lot of money, just because he shows off. Yes, there are videos of him racing a fighter jet, he's beaten it. Yes, there are videos of him riding fancy bikes like the Hellcat, but his love for motorcycles is genuinely true, and he loves all sorts of motorcycles. If you remember a few years ago, I think this was during the Corona time, or even before that, whenever he gets time, his, you know, therapy is he'll go to a bike and he'll open it up. So there was an old Royal Enfield that he just opened it up one day and assembled it back. And that was therapy for him for one day, where he felt very relaxed. So that actually tells you what a motorhead he is. Before I wrap up the video, I'll tell you one very other interesting bit of trivia. MS Dhoni, in his growing years before he became an Indian cricketer, did not have a bike of his own. Actually, he had one bike, and I was lucky enough to see that bike. That was a Royal Enfield, a Bullet 350cc. That was actually his brothers, his elder brothers. And he would share that bike with his elder brother. I saw that bike because when he made his debut in Bangladesh, I was there. But when he came to India, he played that knock in Vizag. After that, the next match was in Jamshedpur. So I went to Ranchi. I went to his house, the old house where he grew up. His family was still staying there before moving out to a bigger house. And that bike, that first bike, that Royal Enfield bike, was parked down there. This is the bike that he, you know, when in his teenage years and even later used to ride. That was his brother's bike. So from there to 84 bikes right now. So that's MS Dhoni and his love for motorcycling. I know that he's a petrol head, so you often see him riding very vintage cars as well. Maybe someday I'll do a video on the cars too. For the moment, if you like this video, be kind enough, give us a like. You know, that will help us make far more many interesting videos like this. So give us a like on this video, share it with your friends who are MS Dhoni fans or are motorcycling fans. And for more such content, don't forget to subscribe to Sports Today. Nikhil Nas signing off.